Carmine Galante. On July 12, 1979, Carmine Galante sat on the patio of Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant in Brooklyn enjoying lunch. He lit his trademark cigar and leaned back. Without warning, 3 masked men burst through the back gate, shotguns raised. Galante reached for his weapon but never had a chance. The first blast hit him in the chest. The shooters kept firing until he collapsed, his cigar still clenched between his teeth. He was boss of the Bonanno crime family and one of the most feared men in organized crime. But his ambition made him dangerous. By 1979, Galante had begun dealing massive heroin through Sicily, refusing to share profits. The commission decided he had become too reckless. Philip Rastelli, the official Bonanno boss imprisoned at the time, gave approval from behind bars. Even his own capos turned on him. That iconic image of his body with the cigar became one of the most famous mob photographs in history. Joe Masseria. On April 15, 1931, Giuseppe Masseria sat at a table inside Nuova Villa Tamaro restaurant on Coney Island, playing cards after lunch. He was relaxed, unaware his most trusted lieutenant had sealed his fate. Lucky Luciano excused himself to use the restroom, and moments later, 4 gunmen rushed in. They opened fire from behind, shooting over 20 rounds. Masseria was struck 4 times in the back and once in the head. He collapsed onto the table, dead instantly. He was known as Joe the Boss, head of what would become the Genovese family. But his hunger for control sparked the bloody Castellamarese War against Salvatore Maranzano. By 1931, his own men had grown tired of the violence. Luciano made a secret deal with Maranzano, promising to deliver Masseria for power. The suspected shooters included Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, and Bugsy Siegel. Outside, Ciro Terranova waited in the getaway car, though he was so shaken that Siegel had to shove him aside to drive. A photograph later showed Masseria slumped at the table with an ace of spades in his hand. Albert Anastasia. On the morning of October 25, 1957, Albert Anastasia walked into the barbershop of the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan for a shave and trim. He settled into the chair, relaxed, a towel draped over his face. 2 men wearing scarves entered moments later. They shoved the barber aside and pulled out pistols. Anastasia, hearing the commotion, jumped from the chair and lunged forward, attacking what he thought were his killers. But he was only striking their reflections in the mirror. The gunman kept shooting until he collapsed on the tile floor. He was one of the founders of Murder, Inc., the Mafia's deadliest enforcement squad, earning the nickname the Lord High Executioner. He controlled New York's waterfront and eventually became boss of what would be called the Gambino crime family. But by 1957, his behavior had become erratic. Rumors spread that he was selling Mafia memberships for cash. His gambling debts mounted and rivals began circling. Vito Genovese wanted his territory. Carlo Gambino, Anastasia's own underboss, saw a chance to take over and quietly join Genovese. That October morning, the plan was executed. The shooters were never caught. Gambino stepped in as boss immediately. Bugsy Siegel. On the night of June 20th, 1947, Benjamin Siegel sat on a sofa in a Beverly Hills mansion reading the Los Angeles Times. Suddenly, bullets shattered the living room window. 9 rounds tore through the glass. 1 bullet struck him in the face, destroying his left eye and sending it across the room. Another ripped through his neck. He died instantly, slumped on the couch. He was one of the most charismatic mobsters in America, a key player in building Las Vegas. Siegel had taken control of the Flamingo Hotel and Casino project, financing it with millions from his mob partners. The problem was that costs spiraled out of control, ballooning from $1 million to over $6 million. The casino opened unfinished and lost money immediately. His partners believed Siegel had either stolen funds or mismanaged their investment. The decision was made. He had become a liability. Who gave the final kill order remains debated, though most point to the commission. Minutes after Siegel was shot, his associates walked into the Flamingo and took control, a move planned in advance. Griselda Blanco. On September 3, 2012, Griselda Blanco walked out of a butcher shop in Medellin, Colombia, carrying fresh meat for dinner. She had survived decades in the drug trade and countless assassination attempts, but her luck ran out. A motorcyclist pulled up beside her. The The passenger raised a pistol and fired twice into her head. She collapsed on the pavement, killed instantly. The assassin drove away through traffic. She was known as the Black Widow and the godmother of cocaine. During the 1970s and 80s, she pioneered cocaine trafficking routes from Colombia into Miami, helping create the bloody cocaine wars that devastated South Florida. She was suspected of ordering hundreds of murders, including the deaths of 3 of her own husbands. Her signature move was the motorcycle assassination, a method she popularized and that would be used against her. By 2012, she had been deported back to Colombia after serving nearly 20 years in a U.S. prison. She tried to live quietly, but enemies never forget. Many believe her murder was revenge ordered by families of people she had killed decades earlier. The killer was never caught. Vito Genovese. In the late 1950s, Vito Genovese stood at the peak of mafia power. He had orchestrated the shooting of Frank Costello, arranged Albert Anastasia's murder, and seized control of the most powerful crime family in New York. But his empire came crashing down. In 1957, he organized the Appalachian Summit to solidify his authority. Police raided the meeting, exposing the mafia nationally. 2 years later, federal agents arrested him on narcotics charges. He was convicted and sentenced to 15 years. From his cell in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, Genovese tried to maintain control, but his influence faded. Many believe he was set up by Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano. Genovese had fled to Italy in 1937 to avoid murder charges, where he supported Mussolini's regime. He only returned after World War II when key witnesses mysteriously turned up dead. On February 14, 1969, while imprisoned, Genovese suffered a massive heart attack at the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. He died at 71. John Gotti. After orchestrating the murder of Paul Castellano in 1985, John Gotti became boss of the Gambino crime family and transformed into a media sensation overnight. He wore expensive suits, waved to cameras, and earned the nickname the Dapper Don. Unlike quiet bosses before him, Gotti craved attention. But fame brought consequences. The FBI intensified their investigation, using wiretaps to build a case. In 1991, everything collapsed. His underboss, Salvatore Gravano, known as Sammy the Bull, agreed to testify against him. Gravano's testimony, combined with recorded conversations, sealed Gotti's fate. In 1992, he was convicted of 5 murders, racketeering, and tax evasion. He was sentenced to life without parole. From that moment, he spent nearly all his time in solitary confinement. His health deteriorated rapidly. By the late 1990s, throat cancer began destroying him. He refused treatment for months. On June 10, 2002, at 61, John Gotti died from cancer complications at the U.S. Medical Center for Federal Prisoners. His funeral drew about 300 mourners, but no representatives from the other New York families attended. Many saw his death as symbolic of the mafia's decline in America. Al Capone, Alphonse Capone, known widely as Scarface, built a criminal empire during Prohibition that controlled Chicago's illegal alcohol, gambling, and vice operations. To the public, he was both a feared gangster and a strange folk hero, but behind the philanthropy was brutal violence. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, where 7 members of a rival gang were gunned down, cemented his reputation as ruthless. Federal authorities couldn't convict him for murder or bootlegging, so they went after him for tax evasion. In 1931, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison. That's when his real suffering began. Years earlier, Capone had contracted syphilis and never sought treatment. By the time he entered prison, the disease had progressed to neurosyphilis, attacking his brain. His mental state deteriorated rapidly. He spent his final year at Alcatraz in the prison hospital, confused and disoriented, before being released in 1939. He spent his last years at his Florida estate mentally shattered. By 1946, his brain had regressed to that of a 12-year-old child. On January 21, 1947, Capone suffered a stroke. His condition worsened. He developed bronchopneumonia, and his weakened body couldn't fight it. On January 25, 1947, at 48 years old, Al Capone died from cardiac arrest. The man who once ruled Chicago died broken, his mind destroyed by a disease he could have cured with simple treatment.